So today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense. Canadians are reasonable, and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake. At the moment, the U.S. tariffs came into effect in the early hours of this morning, and so did the Canadian response. Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods, starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and tariffs on the remaining $125 billion of American products in 21 days' time. Encore aujourd'hui,
again today, we find ourselves forced to introduce 25% tariffs on $155 billion of U.S. merchandise. $30 billion will come into effect immediately, and in 21 days, $125 billion of U.S. merchandise will be hit.
We will also be challenging these illegal actions by filing dispute resolution claims at the World Trade Organization and through the USMCA. But in the meantime, our tariffs will remain in place until the U.S. tariffs are withdrawn, and not a moment sooner. And should these tariffs not cease, we are in active and ongoing discussions with provinces and territories to pursue several non-tariff measures. Measures which will demonstrate that there are no winners in a trade war. Now, just like I did a month ago, I want to speak first directly to the American people. We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you. As of this morning, markets are down, and inflation is set to rise dramatically all across your country. Your government has chosen to put American jobs at risk, at the thousands of workplaces that succeed because of materials from Canada or because of consumers in Canada, or both. They've chosen to raise costs for American consumers on everyday essential items like groceries and gas, on major purchases like cars and homes, and everything in between. They've chosen to harm American national security, impeding access to the abundant critical minerals, energy, building materials, and fertilizers that we have and that the United States needs to grow and prosper. They've chosen to launch a trade war that will, first and foremost, harm American families. They've chosen to sabotage their own agenda that was supposed to usher in a new golden age for the United States. And they've chosen to undermine the incredible work we've done together to tackle the scourge that is fentanyl, a drug that must be wiped from the face of the earth. So on that point, let me be crystal clear. There is absolutely no justification or need whatsoever for these tariffs today. Now, the legal pretext your government is using to bring in these tariffs is that Canada is apparently unwilling to help in the fight against illegal fentanyl. Well, that is totally false. Let's look at the facts. Our border is already safe and secure. Far less than 1% of fentanyl flows and less than 1% of illegal crossings into the United States comes from Canada. But we acted. because we know we can always do better. We responded to concerns, including from the President, by implementing an ambitious $1.3 billion border plan. A border plan that includes generational investments in new AI and imaging tools to stop the flow of fentanyl in its tracks, stronger coordination and information sharing with American agencies, along with the deployment of drones, helicopters, and additional personnel to keep our border secure. Now, a month ago, as part of an agreement with the United States that paused the tariffs, we made further commitments. We appointed Kevin Brasseau as our fentanyl czar, a man who dedicated his multi-decade career in law enforcement to combating organized crime networks and drug trafficking. We designated 7 drug cartels, sick, evil groups who cynically profit off the pain and suffering of people on both sides of the border, as the terrorist organizations that they are. And just yesterday, we launched a new joint operations partnership supported by a $200 million investment between Canada's security and law enforcement agencies, a partnership that will enhance the coordination of information and intelligence in order to thwart criminal gangs involved in the illegal fentanyl trade. And critically, our actions are working. As the U.S. Customs and Border Protection just acknowledged, there was a 97% drop in fentanyl seizures from January compared to December, to a near zero low of less than half an ounce seized in January, even with all the further enforcements and actions we've taken at the borders. In sum, we stepped up. We engaged closely and constructively with the President and his administration. We did everything we promised. We stuck to our word. And we did it because we believe in working together to protect our citizens. Now I want to speak directly to one specific American, Donald. In the over 8 years you and I have worked together, we've done big things. We signed a historic deal that has created record jobs and growth in both of our countries. We've done big things together on the world stage, as Canada and the US have done together for decades, for generations. And now we should be working together to ensure even greater prosperity for North Americans in a very uncertain and challenging world. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We two friends fighting is exactly what our opponents around the world want to see. And now, to my fellow Canadians, I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough, even though we're all going to pull together, because that's what we do. We will use every tool at our disposal so Canadian workers and businesses can weather this storm. From expanding EI benefits and making them more flexible to providing direct supports to businesses, we will be there as needed to help. But Canada, make no mistake, no matter how long this lasts, no matter what the cost, the federal government and other orders of government will be there for you. We will defend Canadian jobs. We will take measures to prevent predatory behavior that threatens Canadian companies because of the impacts of this trade war, leaving them open to takeovers. We will relentlessly fight to protect our economy. We will stand up for Canadians every single second of every single day, because this country is worth fighting for. Les derniers mois ont été
The
stressants
recent months
et
have been
honnêtement
stressful
épuisants
and, in fact,
pour nous
exhausting
tous.
for all of us.
Mais je crois qu'on peut
But I believe
être rassuré
we can be
par l'incroyable
reassured by the
solidarité
incredible
dont on a tous
solidarity
été
we've
témoins
seen
entre nous.
among
Solidarité
Canadians.
entre nos entreprises,
Solidarity among
nos syndicats, notre
businesses,
société
among
civile,
unions, the
les
civil
communautés
society,
autochtones
Indigenous
et tous les
communities,
Canadiens.
and all Canadians.
L'ensemble de la société canadienne
All
parle
of
d'une
Canadian
seule voix
society is speaking with
pour
a
qu'on se
single
fasse
voice
entendre de nos
so that we
partenaires
can be
américains
heard by
pour
our U.S.
illustrer que
partners and
l'imposition
to
de droits de
illustrate that the
douane, c'est
imposition of
une
these
très mauvaise
tariffs
idée.
is a very bad idea.
En même temps,
At the same
on
time,
travaille à l'interne
we are
pour faire
working
tomber les
internally
obstacles au
to
commerce
remove
entre
the
nos provinces et
barriers
territoires.
to internal trade
travaille pour
between the provinces and
rejoindre de nouveaux
territories.
marchés à
We're
travers le
working
monde,
to try and
pour
reach
bâtir
new
une
markets
économie
around the
toujours
world,
plus
to
forte et
build an
plus
economy
résiliente.
even more strong and resilient than
Dans les
before.
dernières années, j'ai eu
In recent
plusieurs occasions de
years, I've
discuter
had a
avec des
number of
leaders du monde
opportunities to
entier.
talk to
Mon
global
message
leaders, and
est
my
toujours le
message
même.
is always the
Le
same.
Canada est un
Canada
partenaire
is
fiable
a
et notre
reliable
porte est grande
partner,
ouverte.
and our door is wide
Dans les
open.
dernières semaines,
In
on
recent
a
weeks,
aussi redoublé
we have
d'efforts pour
also
renforcer nos liens avec le Mexique,
redoubled our
qui
efforts
lui aussi
to
été
work with
frappé
Mexico,
par ces tarifs.
which is also being hit with these tariffs.
Ensemble, on va chercher de
Together,
nouvelles
we
façons
will
de
seek
collaborer
new ways of
et de
working
s'appuyer
together
l'un sur l'autre
and to
pour faire
provide
face
mutual
à cette
support
menace.
in the face of this threat.
Face à l'incertitude,
In the
face à
face of
l'inquiétude, les
uncertainty
Canadiens
and
ont fait
worry,
preuve de
Canadians
tellement de
have shown
solidarité.
so much
Je vous
solidarity.
ai vu
I
partager
saw
des listes
you
de produits
sharing
canadiens pour
lists
aider
of
vos
Canadian
proches
products to
à
help
appuyer les
your loved
entreprises
ones
d'ici.
and friends.
Je vous ai vu changer vos plans de vacances et
Support
opter
Canadian
pour des
businesses.
magnifiques
I
destinations
saw you
touristiques qu'on
change
a
your
ici
travel
chez nous,
plans
au
to
Canada.
stay in Canada rather than going
Je
to
vous
the
ai
United
vu
States.
redoubler
I
d'efforts
saw
pour
you
soutenir.
redouble your efforts.
That's Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, speaking there in Ottawa as Canada responds to those 25% tariffs imposed on the country by the administration of Donald J. Trump. Let's bring in our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, who's been listening in to this as well. And Ed, look, we heard from Justin Trudeau there, quoting the Wall Street Journal, saying to Donald Trump, even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. And he seems to be doing this in stages, doesn't he, Mr. Trudeau, in response to these 25% tariffs. 25% tariffs going on US goods immediately, $30 billion worth now, and another $125 billion worth in 21 days. Why in the stages?
Canada
Le Canada.
and defend Canada.
On va passer ensemble à travers
Together,
des moments
we will get
difficiles.
through some tough times.
Mais après vous avoir
But
vu aller dans les
after
dernières
seeing
semaines,
you and seeing your reaction in
j'ai
recent
jamais
weeks,
été
I
aussi
have to say,
optimiste.
I have never been as
au
optimistic
futur de notre beau
with
pays.
respect to the future of our
Malgré
beautiful
tous les
country,
défis
in
qu'on
spite
est en
of
train de
all
vivre
the
ensemble.
challenges we're facing right
Le
now.
Canada
Canada
reste le meilleur pays sur
remains the best country in the world. We have so many reasons to be proud of our home, to be proud of our land, but I'm especially proud of our ability to come together when that is required. Canadians of different backgrounds, who speak different languages, have different religions. But, you know, when it comes time to defending our country, we speak with a single voice and walk hand in hand. In spite of all, Canadians will always be relying on each other.
Now, we've been through tough spots before. But every time we've faced long odds and seemingly insurmountable obstacles, we've not only survived, we've emerged stronger than ever. Because when it comes to defending our great nation, there is no price we all aren't willing to pay. And today is no different. Merci beaucoup, mes amis.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. Merci beaucoup. We will now take 20 minutes of questions. Nous prendrons 20 minutes de questions. One question, one follow-up, une question, un suivi. Merci.
Hi, Prime Minister. Tom Perry with CBC. You're reaching out to the president today. You're speaking directly to him. We heard from U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who says that Donald Trump will be speaking to Canadians. And he also says that he wants to see more progress on fentanyl. So my question to you is, do you have any conversation scheduled with Donald Trump in the coming days? Is that something maybe your successor should do? And do you really believe that this is about fentanyl, or is there something larger at play here?
I have offered to speak to Donald over the past number of days, and I expect to speak with him in the days to come. I'm always there to talk with him about the importance of working together to take on the world at this time. The facts show very clearly that in terms of taking action on fentanyl, we are doing everything that is necessary, and not just for the United States, for ourselves as well, as Canadians are suffering as well from the scourge that is illegal fentanyl. We have laid out extensive plans, actions, cooperations, including as recently as the past days in Washington, and they have always been very well received. And the numbers bear that out. I think in what President Trump said yesterday, that there is nothing Canada or Mexico can do to avoid these tariffs, underlines very clearly what I think a lot of us have suspected for a long time, that these tariffs are not specifically about fentanyl, even though that is the legal justification he must use to actually move forward with these tariffs.
Monsieur Trudeau, en français, à part l'allocution que vous avez eue envers Monsieur Trump, lui avez-vous parlé au cours des derniers jours?
Have you spoken to Mr. Trump recently? No. I made myself available to talk to him in recent days, as we did a month ago, and I hope to be able to speak to him in the coming days, and I'm always open to doing that.
Off the top, you're seeing the United States seemingly moving closer to Moscow. This is the same day that the United States has announced it's suspending aid for Ukraine. The Kremlin just said that U.S. foreign policy now is in alignment with Russia. So how do you successfully, or your successor, successfully negotiate with a president who seems to regard his friends as his enemies and his enemies as his friends?
In this regards, Canada and Canadians are very clear. We know who our friends are. We know who our opponents are, and there is no question that Vladimir Putin and his attack not just on Ukraine, but on the rules-based international order, on the founding principles of the United Nations, is an opponent of Canada. I think the question that we all need to be watching closely is, what do the American people think? How do Americans feel about jettisoning one's friends and allies in favor of a country that has never wished Americans well and continues to act in ways that harm the global economy and specifically the American economy and American values and principles?
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Valérie Gavage de Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada, I'd like you to talk about potential relief programs. In Quebec, they're talking out the possibility of 160,000 jobs being lost. There are plants closing already. Now, is there something on the table today that you can tell Canadians in order to try and mute the effect of these tariffs? Well, there are things that we will be looking at immediately when it comes to the employment insurance program, but I want to remind Canadians that our goal is not to find ways for Canadians to get through these tough times. It is to prevent these tough times from lasting any more than they absolutely have to. If we can have those tariffs removed tomorrow, that's what we will try to do. Our priority is to put an end to this economic war, and the fact that Americans will immediately be facing layoffs and problems with respect to their own consumer products will certainly help us to put an end to this challenge as quickly as possible. But in fact, we are looking at a number of options, a number of things that we can do if those tariffs remain in place longer than a day or two, even with the immediate review of EI programs that we might want to tweak.
Foremost, as we reflect on the impacts on Canadian workers and Canadian jobs and businesses, is that, first of all, there will be similar impacts on Americans losing their jobs, American families paying more for basic goods that they rely on at a time where times are tight everywhere. But our focus has to be on getting these tariffs lifted as quickly as possible. What can we do in the coming days is our focus to make sure that these tariffs don't last a second longer than necessary. So we will be looking at, including looking in the coming day at things we can do around adjusting EI to support people through this difficult time. But our priority has to be not on figuring out how to manage through these tariffs over the coming days and weeks and months, but on doing everything we can to get them lifted and put an end to this unjustified trade war that hurts American families and Canadian families.
On a l'impression que vous n'avez plus beaucoup de cartes dans votre jeu.
I think you don't have that many cards left to play. Now, would the renegotiation of the CUSMA agreement be a way to address this? Well, right now, in our conversations with the President, it's not very clear what he's actually trying to do or what he wants. Perhaps the only clarity is what he's said a number of times, which is that his goal is to ruin the Canadian economy so that he can then move on to annex the country. That's what he wants. So I'm not sure. I'm not really certain what kind of negotiation could go forward right now that would convince him that this is the right thing to do. And really, what we have to do is demonstrate that our economies are very closely linked and that these kinds of barriers and tariffs will mean suffering for people on both sides of the border. That, in fact, we should be working together, doing things together. And while he decides to ruin the Canadian economy, I don't know whether, in terms of negotiations or in the face of such bad faith, where he brings in tariffs against Canada without any factual justification, I don't know whether opening negotiations would be a good idea. We're open to doing it if he wants that, but he has not even referred to that possibility.
I'm just trying to remember. What was that? CUSMA, that's right. I think in terms of what he wants, and I heard he talked about banking again this morning in a tweet, which doesn't make any sense because American banks, there's about 16 American banks currently active in Canada holding about $113 billion worth of assets in this country. So the American banks are alive and well and prospering in Canada. It's an example of not really being able to see what it is that he wants, because even the excuse that he's giving for these tariffs today of fentanyl is completely bogus, completely unjustified, completely false. So we actually have to fold back on the one thing he has said repeatedly, that what he wants is to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that'll make it easier to annex us, is the second half of his thought. Now, first of all, that's never going to happen. We will never be the 51st state. But yeah, he can do damage to the Canadian economy, and he's started this morning. But he is rapidly going to find out, as American families are going to find out, that that's going to hurt people on both sides of the border. Americans will lose jobs. Americans will be paying more for groceries, for gas, for cars, for homes, because we have always done best when we work together. So we are, of course, open to starting negotiations on the CUSMA review, but let us not fool ourselves about what he seems to be wanting. And I will admit, I have been holding out hope that these tariffs were just a clever negotiating ploy that would have the impact that they're having now without even bringing them in over the past weeks, as we've seen order books dry up for Canadian companies from American customers, as we've seen expansion plans in Canada put on hold, as we've seen people choosing to invest in the United States over the past weeks because of the threat of tariffs. But now that he's moved forward with tariffs, we're going to see the real impact of a trade war between our two countries. And that impact will be to hurt American families.
Prime Minister Tonda McCharles with the Toronto Star. I hope you can be as specific as possible for a number of these points. Everybody's looking to what actually you're going to do. In your statement last night, you referenced non-tariff measures, and I want to know exactly what you're prepared to contemplate there. And given that your likely successors, both Carney and Poilievre, have said it should be dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs, that's on $600 billion worth of American imports. If you were to do that, is that on or off the table?
I will be sitting down, as I have every week for the past many, many weeks, with the premiers this afternoon to talk about our individual, combined and collective response to this. As we've put on the table, the federal government has $155 billion worth of tariffs that we can move forward with immediately, and that we will be moving forward with both now and 21 days from now to give Canadian companies time to adjust their supply chains to not be overly impacted by this. But there are many other things that have been surfaced by different premiers in different approaches that we can look at. One, for example, is around purchasing and around suppliers and around contracts, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal, with American companies. There are many different things that we've been looking at, and that conversation with the premiers this afternoon is going to be very, very important. But I can tell you what we have seen is Canadians across provinces and territories, across political lines, are united in knowing that this is a time to hit back hard and to demonstrate that a fight with Canada will have no winners. And the sooner we can get past this fight, back to working together to take on the world, as our two countries always have, the better we'll all be.
To what extent have you turned or gotten cooperation from any other allies to exact more pain on the U.S. to accelerate getting to a solution? And are you concerned that Mexico appears to be trying to do their own thing maybe next Sunday? Where are you with any guarantees you've got allies?
I've just spent quite a bit of time over these past couple of weeks meeting with European and international allies to talk about a number of different things, including standing up for the rules-based order by defending Ukraine, but also being there for each other in a more challenging and uncertain world. And I can tell you that every country is very, very aware that if the American government is willing to do this to their own closest ally, neighbor, and friend, everyone is vulnerable to a trade war. And our ability to work together thoughtfully and strategically to make sure we're supporting our citizens, we're doing things together in a more diversified way, is something that is on the mind of all of our allies.
En français, vous en êtes où dans les discussions avec les alliés, que ce soit européens ou
Where are you in discussions with European allies? Well, as you know, in recent weeks, I had a lot of conversations with many of our allies and our European friends on the international stage, and I can tell you that everyone is worried. They see that if the United States is prepared to do that to Canada, their closest ally and partner, their most interconnected ally, then everyone is at risk. And our ability to work together and to do more together to diversify our supply chains in a more deliberate manner. Well, these are the conversations we're having now, and we will continue to have them with our allies. With our Mexican partners, we continue to be in close contact, and we continue to look at how we can do things together, as I said, to not suffer any more than needed through these tariffs.
Haynes from CTV National News. As we know, the Liberal Party is going to be picking a new leader over the weekend, but when is it going to be your last official day as Prime Minister?
That will be up to a conversation between the new leader and myself to figure out how long a transition is needed. It should happen reasonably quickly, but there's a lot of things to do in a transition like this, particularly at this complicated time in the world. My last day will be determined once the new leader of the Liberal Party has been selected. This is a conversation we will have to have about how much time will be required for the transition. There are a lot of things to be considered, but I know that we will be able to do that quite quickly.
It sounds like it won't be immediately on March 9th or March 10th, so it sounds like you'll probably still have some time remaining to put in some more actions on this. Is one of those things that you're considering going to be taxing oil, gas, and potash exports, even if premiers don't consent to that?
As I said, the most important thing we're facing, as I've said, the most important thing we can do is ensure that Canadians remain united. That's why whatever response, individually or collectively, we do across the country, we have to make sure that no single part of the country is carrying a greater burden or suffering any more than everyone else. This is going to be tough for all of us, but we need to be pulling and holding Canadians together every step of the way. And that's the conversation I'm going to be having with the premiers this afternoon in our now weekly meetings. There will be many different ideas we discuss, but the most important thing, more important than doing specific or effective pressure points on the United States, is keeping Canadians united together. As we go through the pain that these American tariffs will inflict on our economy, on our workplaces, on Canadian families, we will be able to say this is happening to us by the decisions of a different government. As American families suffer the impact of these tariffs, of this trade war with Canada, they will be saying this is happening because our own government is choosing to do it to us. That's a very different proposition. And the most important thing right now, more important than anything else, is for Canadians to remain united. And that's why all premiers will be focused on things that make sure Canadians don't get divided amongst ourselves. This is a time for us to pull together, because the Americans will be having very real and very challenging debates and discussions about these actions. There will be no debate in Canada about whether or not we should be pulling together and responding. Everyone is aligned on that, and protecting that is job one for the Canadian government and the Canadian Prime Minister.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau.
Okay. Évidemment, of course, there are a number of things that different provinces or industrial sectors may want to do to not feel so much pressure from the U.S. But I want to be very clear in saying that it's not because we don't want one sector or industry to carry a heavier burden than any other. And therefore, we have to be fair in our response and in the supports that we provide. Because the most important thing in all of this situation is that Canadians remain united.
And that's what I intend to speak to the premiers of the provinces and territories about this afternoon. Unity with respect to our courage and determination as a country and as Canadians will be our most effective weapon in the coming days, because Canadian families facing negative impacts as a result of these tariffs will be saying, well, we're going to stick together as Canadians because it's another country that's doing this to us. And we are going to stand firm and get through this together. American families that see job losses happening, that see prices going up because of these tariffs, they will have to say, well, yeah, it's because of our own government that we're suffering now. And that will lead to very tough conversations between Americans with respect to why this trade war is even happening.
We will take one last question and follow up. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau. Mackenzie Gray with Global. You mentioned the markets earlier. Someone who knows a thing about them, Warren Buffett, came out and said that these tariffs could be viewed as an act of war. Does the Canadian government believe these tariffs from Donald Trump is an act of war from the U.S.?
Canadians are not angry at the American people for this. We don't have anything against Americans. Americans are our neighbors, our friends, our partners. We do things together. We've done things together for decades and generations. This is a policy decision by the American government designed to go after the Canadian economy. This is a trade war, yes. But Canadians are hurt. Canadians are angry. We're going to choose to not go on vacation in Florida or Old Orchard Beach or wherever. We're going to choose to try to buy Canadian products and forego bourbon and other classic American products. And yeah, we're probably going to keep booing the American anthem. But let me tell Americans, we're not booing you. We're not booing your teams. We're not booing your players. We're booing a policy that is designed to hurt us. And we're insulted. And we're angry. But we're Canadian, which means we're going to stand up for each other. We're going to fight. And we're going to win.
There are probably a lot of folks watching on TV today who've been laid off or they were told not to come into work today because of these tariffs. Can you explain to them why you've not announced any relief measures today to help those folks out?
As I've said, our entire focus has been on preventing these tariffs from coming in, if there was at all a way, and it now looks like there was never a way we were going to be able to avoid these tariffs that the President was determined to do. And our focus now is going to be on making sure that they get lifted and that there is an end to this trade war as quickly as possible. But over the past month, we have been working on measures that if these tariffs last longer than a few hours or a few days, we be able to help Canadian citizens, Canadian workers, Canadian companies make it through this time. But let's also be clear, this is going to be tough. The American trade war is going to hurt the Canadian economy and is going to hurt all of us. What our government needs to make sure we're doing is try to make sure that nobody goes hungry and that everyone carries their share of this. And that's a hard thing to do, but that's where we're leaning in, both as a federal government and with provinces and territories on responses to be there for Canadians.